Well, good morning and welcome to another live show from Kevin Williams of Survival Schools Rider Training. This is my webcast Elevenses. I hope you enjoyed the recorded show last Wednesday. The reason it was recorded was because I was off delivering my Science of Being Seen presentation to Devon Advanced Motorcyclists. So I'd just like to give them a quick shout out and say thank you to them for inviting me down there. I had a great time. Lovely to see some people I knew, including Tony Hayward from Devon and Somerset Fire and Rescue, and Karen Steers as well from the same organisation. There was somebody else whose name I didn't catch, all from Devon and Somerset, who'd come along to see me present Science of Being Seen, and they're very complimentary too about the presentation. And they were saying it was rather sad that the Science of Being Seen has actually been dropped from the Biker Down curriculum, and that they actually are still using a version of my Science of Being Seen. So I'm more than happy to support any fire and rescue service that wants to run Science of Being Seen as a Module 3. I just can't do it myself with Kent Fire and Rescue anymore, which is a real shame, because I really did enjoy the outings down to Rochester to the road safety experience to get involved with real motorcyclists hands-on. But anyway, thanks again to Devon Advanced Motorcyclists. Again, they were very complimentary about the Science of Being Seen talk, and also the little follow-up exercise I did, which really was intended to make us see that we tend to take knowledge for granted when we're out there on the roads, and just to actually sometimes it takes a few minutes to re-evaluate what we're doing, and just to step back and think, to understand that in fact things don't go quite as swimmingly as we might think they want to. Clive, Kevin, Paul and Kevin have all looked in this morning. Good to see you all. Thank you very much indeed. Right, okay, so what have we got for you in today's show? Well, Norton have secured some government funding for electric bikes. The V4SV Norton Roadster does appear to be edging closer to production. Royal Enfield are launching a nice looking little 350 Roadster. April-May's sales figures actually show a pretty steep downturn in numbers of bikes registered. Toyota have been working on a replaceable hydrogen pack, and we'll be looking to see if there are potential applications for bikes there. I'll be talking about titanium exhaust wrap. Yes, it really is a thing, rather disappointingly. And today's discussion point, I seem to have left that out of the preamble for the show, but it'll be about applying Occam's razor. If there are two explanations for a potential problem, look at the simpler one first. It's usually the right answer, not always, but usually it will give you the better clue. So, right, so pretty much on with the show. Now, the first thing I do want to talk about is that we do have a ride out coming up Saturday a week, so just 6 days away. This is going out to Brill. If I can get the photograph up, we'll even see a photograph of the area we're likely to be riding. There we are, that's Brill Windmill. The plan is to take just 5 riders out for a gently paced but scenic ride. So if you're not so fond of group rides and you find them a bit hectic, a bit rushed, or a bit too many riders on them that you don't know, do come along. I believe I still have a couple of places left. There is one cancellation. Somebody kindly let me know they can't make it. So that's heading out from Beaconsfield area. I will send out the details in due course in the next day or two. It's free, of course. You can just come along, and but do pre-book, please, because I don't want people turning up for these on random. Now, okay, yesterday, Friday the 17th of June, a press release from the government's Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy announced that Norton have been awarded £17.2 million, including £8.5 million funding through the Advanced Propulsion Centre, APC, Collaborative Research and Development Competition, to develop an electric motorcycle that delivers high level of race performance and touring range, not only enhancing workforce capabilities and securing local jobs, but helping to strengthen the UK's competitive supply chain. Now, the Norton project, which I have been following with regular updates here on Elevenses, is developing what they describe as an electric motorcycle that blends Norton's design DNA with racing performance, touring range, and lightweight handling. So presumably they are talking about the TE1. Now, this is the bike that Norton recently announced that they would be revealing to the public. It's apparently now past their rolling road and track tests. And you'll recall from previous shows that it's a collaborative effort, and also involved in the project are Delta Cosworth, the electric powertrain division of the famous Midlands engine builder, and they are responsible for the battery pack, and with WMG, who is an organisation that's part of the University of Warwick, and they are taking on the battery technology side of things apparently, and some modelling. Now, a second winner on that project will be developing an all-terrain electric delivery truck, and that's designed for emerging markets, and it will be manufactured in the UK, and the idea is that can withstand tough off-road conditions and also use long life, lower cost batteries. So those are the two projects. They are between them set to secure more than 550 jobs and save 2.76 million tonnes of CO2, which the press release says is the equivalent of removing the lifetime emissions of 1.1 million cars from the road, which all seems a little bit sort of fanciful figures to me, just sort of plucking numbers out of midair, I suspect there. Minister for Investment Lord Grimstone said this funding achieved through the government-backed Advanced Propulsion Centre will support UK businesses at the cutting edge of the automotive industry to trial the very latest tech, from the development of electric motorbikes to off-road trucks. Supporting these strategically important technologies lays the path for our electric vehicle sector to compete on a global scale, driving jobs and growth nationwide, whilst also providing cleaner, more sustainable modes of transport. In addition, 19 early-stage proposals that could bolster the UK electric vehicle supply chain have also been awarded funding to research, prove or enhance the case for their scale-up, with the potential to create further jobs throughout the country. So, okay, now as you probably know, of course, Norton, the company, has been owned for the last 2 years by the Indian conglomerate TVS Motor, after they acquired Norton Motorcycles for 16 million from the receivers. Now, Norton have recently opened a new global headquarters which houses state-of-the-art manufacturing capability, and the company's design and research hub that's in Solihull in West Midlands. Now, in April, TVS announced that they were actually making themselves an additional investment of £1 million in Norton. So in real terms, government money there is pretty small beer. Now, hopefully due diligence has been performed before parting with money out of the public kitty, because it's hard to view the last few years of the Stuart Garner Norton era as anything other than a disaster, both financial and PR. So you'll probably recall the pension pot raids and the fact that when the few V4 SS superbikes that were actually built actually made it onto the road, you'll know that they were first recalled and then condemned. Owners have been told not to ride them as they were dangerous to ride. So also in news this week, Norton have actually sent out a press release announcing that the relaunch of the re-engineered V4 SV is actually imminent. So let's take a look at the bike. There it is. It's the original 1200cc V4 racer on the road engine that was designed in the Gardner era has been detuned, and it has been thoroughly re-engineered, and it says almost all the engine components are redesigned parts. The original bike apparently used a motor based on 230 horsepower Aprilia motors, which were purchased from Paul Bird's defunct GP effort. Now, that is a report I have read. I haven't independently confirmed that, but they were the engines that went on to be used by Norton, you may recall, in their TT Racer. Now, that the starting point was taken, and with specialist engineers Ricardo, who I will point out are a company with a very high reputation for engine design. They went on to design the Norton V4 motor, and the difference between that and the Aprilia was that the Norton was spread to a wider 72-degree angle between the cylinder blocks, rather than the Norton RSV4's 65-degree arrangement. When that engine actually ran, it produced a claimed 200 horsepower at 12,500 RPM. But factory problems, particularly, I suspect, in terms of money being paid to suppliers, caused major quality control problems. And something else to note was that the old machine was actually only Euro 4 compliant, so not to the very latest standards. So the fully revised engine does make somewhat less power, 185 horsepower, so 15 horsepower down. Not that I think most people would ever notice that. 125 Newton meters, so it's not a short torque. Should have plenty of get up and go for the average rider. However, the press release has still raised a few complaints in the sort of chattering websites. One thing that has attracted attention is the electronics package, which some are describing as dated because it only has 3 riding modes. Well, the fact is that the bike is definitely on the exclusive side, and 3 riding modes or not, you're very unlikely to see one on the road because they are setting the owners back around £44,000. Okay, so that's the Norton. Couple of comments. Yeah, Jeff has said good morning as well, so good to see you there, Jeff. Right, what was the other comment? Oh yeah, no, just one more new comment. Okay, I was just looking for another one. I thought somebody else had said something, but apparently not. Right, so anyway, at the other end of the wool extending scale from the Norton comes the word that there is another new 350 single on the way from Royal Enfield. Now, you'll recall that the Indian company continues to build bikes under the name of the famous UK company, and it's moving from strength to strength, exporting the bikes back to Blighty. And I very much suspect that this bike will see the light of day here in the UK, since it appears to be admirably suited to the light commuter role. Now, it's rumoured to be called the Hunter 350, and the bike could be launched as early as August this year. It's said to be based on the all-new J platform 349 single-cylinder CC engine that is also offered in the Meteor and the Classic. Now, the motor puts out a modest 20 horsepower and 27 Newton meters, so that the Norton will see it off in a straight line with no problem at all. But let's have a quick look at the bike. Here it is. The differences over the Meteor and the, what's the other one I've just mentioned? The Classic, wasn't it? Yeah, is the styling. What you see here is what I'd describe really as a neoclassic, whatever that means. It's a standard roadster, really. You'll see that you get a sort of a rather nice looking swoopy teardrop shaped fuel tank. There's a one-piece seat which has a sort of little bit of a step up for the pillion there, and there's a short tail section, so it all seems to blend together fairly well. Although I have to say that a photograph of a test rider that was espied in, here we have the picture in India, actually on the bike. He seems to be having a little bit of a problem with the foot pegs, as he appears to have placed his feet on the pillion rests. So maybe the footrests are a little bit far forward for the average rider. Now, the bike is actually shown with alloy wheels at both ends. Just come back to the original picture there. Although they are said to be an option, and that the cheaper model will come with wire wheels, disc brakes front and rear, and the suspension appears to be straight off the other Royal Enfield models. But I think that's quite an attractive little bike. Now, the good news is that the machine is supposedly going to be priced below the Bullet 350, and it will become the budget bike in the Royal Enfield lineup. But given that the other model prices are hardly extravagant, it could come in somewhere around about 4K. But bear in mind, prices are going up all the time. There are supply chain issues. I wouldn't be at all surprised to see that it's actually up to around 5,000 by the time it gets here. Anyway, that leads me neatly into May's sale figures, where Royal Enfield actually sit in 5th place on the sales chart behind Honda, Yamaha, Triumph and BMW, but they're ahead of Lexmoto, Kawasaki, KTM, Suzuki and Ducati. Now, these figures for May have been out for a while. I just hadn't had a chance to talk about them until now, but they do show up how supply chain issues have hit registrations as availability becomes a problem. Now, this apparently stems mostly from the shortage of chips for electronic system, and that has, of course, impacted the ability of the manufacturers to actually complete bikes. You will recall that Harley Davidson, in fact, shut down their production lines for over 2 weeks because of an issue with parts. It was rumored to be a shortage of chips. Now, suppliers of these electrical parts are ramping up supplies. They were slashed during lockdown as factories actually switched to producing chips for domestic goods, but it takes time for the new production lines to come on stream, and the shortage is likely to continue right through 2023 and possibly even into 2024, according to some analysts. Now, at the same time, I would hazard a guess that many buyers are already thinking twice about new purchases, as the double whammy of the effect of the war in Ukraine on fuel prices has hit budgets, and of course inflation is also set to rise. There are forecasts for 11% plus over the next year, and all that means that the kind of disposable income that many of us will look to use to buy a new motorcycle is going to be a bit more hard to find. Now, sales of bikes over the first 5 months in the UK have been said to be strong. The first signs of a dramatic slowdown did appear in April when sales fell by 4.8%. Now, last month, the drop was even more pronounced. It was down 13% in May, year on year from the previous year. Although adding up the first 5 months of the year, bike sales were up just under 9% at just under 47,000 registrations over last year's total. So far, so good. But whether or not that will carry on those positive notes for manufacturers and retailers alike is hard to say. Industry experts remain bullish, one predicting that the mood will remain up and the market is set up to hit the best in the decade. Now, I have my doubts about that one. But certainly one area that is staying strong is the demand for small electric scooters and motorcycles. The L1 segment, that's the moped segment basically, electric moped sales were 251% up on last year's figures. And the L3 segment, which is roughly equivalent to 125s because they can be ridden on an A1 license, was up 73.8%. Now, okay, that's still only 0.5% of all sales, but it's an indication, I would say, the way the wind is blowing. Although the petrol-engined Yamaha NMAX 125 was once again the UK's best-selling PTW overall, V-Moto's Super Socco CPX and the Sauron Light B were the best-selling mopeds, and they are both electric bikes. So don't forget, if you want to catch this show on a regular basis, it goes out Wednesdays and Sundays. So I'm trying to read my script at the same time as clicking various buttons. I really do need a producer. Goes out Wednesdays and Sundays, goes out at 11. Regularly, it is live. Occasionally, it is recorded as it was on Wednesday. And very, very occasionally, work commitments just mean I haven't got time to produce a show. But generally speaking, if I can possibly manage it, 2 shows a week it is, and usually live if I can manage that too. So do set your reminder. And if you miss it live here, you can always pop over to my YouTube channel, Survival Skills UK, and find them over there, along with a lot of other video content, incidentally. So, right, where are we then? We are talking Toyota, and we are talking something rather interesting. Now, those little things that you see there, it's very rather difficult to get a sense of scale, so I'll tell you in a moment how big they are. It's something that Toyota, the car manufacturer, have been working on. They are actually portable hydrogen canisters, and what they hope is that they could be used to power devices across a wide range of applications. Now, to give you an idea of the dimensions, the canister in the photo actually measures around 45 centimeters in length, so just under half a meter, and about 16 centimeters in width. So it's somewhat bigger than a standard thermos flask. That was about the only comparative thing I could think of. They weigh about 11 pounds. Now, according to Toyota, a tank this size can actually supply enough energy to run a household microwave for 3 to 4 hours. Now, practically speaking, that's not an awful lot of use, I will admit. If you're going to run your house on hydrogen gas rather than propane, as some people have to do, you're going to want a cylinder that lasts more than a few minutes when you've got your gas cooker on. But anyway, the point is that there's no reason in theory, of course, that the tank couldn't be scaled up or possibly mounted in an array of tanks which can be tapped one at a time. And it does lead, of course, to the interesting idea that these could be seen as an alternative to the replacement battery technology that we're seeing springing up in a number of countries. You'll recall I've talked on several occasions about battery swap stations in use in India and Taiwan, for example. Now, as I have said before, it still means persuading both the UK and the EU governments that hydrogen is actually a viable alternative energy source. Now, at the moment, both would have appeared to have ruled out hydrogen as a fuel thanks to the zero tailpipe emission directive. Burning anything in air, as I have explained, produces NOx, and hydrogen is no exception. However, most of the NOx can be cleaned up with catalytic converters. So I'm sure that we could get pretty close to zero, but not absolutely to zero. The other issue, of course, is that currently most hydrogen is produced from fossil fuels anyway. For example, the fossil fuels in Australia, brown coal out there, have been used to produce hydrogen, which is now being shipped to Japan, where they are very keen on hydrogen fuel. But there are plans to site major solar arrays. Chile apparently is one potential location, and hydrogen tankers powered by hydrogen themselves could be moving hydrogen around the globe in the same way that oil tankers currently carry oil. So I think there is a future for a carbon-free hydrogen fueled internal combustion engine. Anyway, that's my speculation. So the back to bikes. One of the uglier aspects of the current hipster bike scene, and I do have to say, sorry if you own that sort of bike, but I do hope it's over soon, is the tendency for riders to cover their exhaust pipes in black wrap. If you look at any of the custom models that you see regularly online, they all seem to wrap nice shiny chrome pipes in this nasty black plastic stuff. I don't know what it is. Well, in cars, the idea was it retained the heat in the exhaust, and it also kept the engine compartment cooler. So for race purposes, where you're producing a lot of energy, a lot of heat from an engine, there was obviously it helps keep the cab cool. And supposedly, according to people who put it on motorbikes, it stops you burning yourself if you manage to accidentally touch your hot exhaust pipe. Though, personally, having actually touched some hot wrap in the past, I have my doubts about that. Now, why would you want to make your exhaust pipes hotter? Well, what it actually does is it means that the gas stays less dense, and that makes it flow through the exhaust system faster, and that is supposed to improve exhaust scavenging and also to lower intake temperatures, because more of the exhaust gas is cleaned out of the cylinder, and that is all supposed to add horsepower. Whether that actually works in a modern engine, I have absolutely no idea, and certainly whether it works in a sort of hacked about bike with weird air filters and weird exhaust systems on a custom, again, I suspect is very, very unlikely. But anyway, I suspect most people wrap the stuff around their exhaust pipe simply because they think it looks cool. Well, does it? Well, that's a matter for debate, really, isn't it? But the latest must-have gadget to put on your bike appears to be titanium exhaust wrap. Now, I did have a picture of it somewhere, but I seem to have lost it. I don't know where that's gone, so never mind. But imagine something shiny and sort of knitted, and you've got the basic idea. So these titanium knitted sleeves were apparently originally designed to be used on car turbochargers, but now you can get them in a smaller size, which is said to be suitable for headers, mid-pipes and link pipes of modern-day motorcycle. One reviewer gushes, perhaps the best part of all this is that the sleeves actually look kind of nice, like a little scarf for your exhaust pipe. Well, I have news for you. I think they're hideous, but if you want, $38 will purchase you a sleeve, presumably just one. And I have to say, they won't be appearing on my bike anytime soon. Right, okay, so don't forget, if you do want to support the show, you can pop over to my coffee page. There are hundreds of better biking articles over there. £3 buys you access to the vast majority of them. Some are free, most are £3 will open up most of them, and then if you want to become a regular subscriber, then you'll get even more specialist content rather. Terry says the hydrogen electric debate is a little reminiscent of the old Beta versus VHS. Yeah, I kind of see where you're coming from there, Terry. I have to admit, when you've mentioned 8-track. And we have Sue looking in as well. So good morning to you, Sue. Thank you for coming along. Now, final article for today. It's not just the Queen celebrating Jubilee. It's actually 25 years since I launched survival skills rider training on an unsuspecting world, and 10 years since I began posting my better biking tips on my Facebook page. So over the last few weeks, I have been looking back over the database of old posts and emails and stuff that I've kept as possibly interesting at some point. And many are actually as relevant today as they were then. So here's one from the archive. When do you know that there's something wrong with your bike? What are the diagnostics that you use to discover you have a problem? Now, maybe it's a visual inspection. A leaking fork seal, for example, is fairly obvious. So is a leaking fuel tap. Maybe, though, we have to make a visual inspection of that bike, which goes a little more in depth. Now, when I was a courier, my old CB 250 RS Hondas were prone to snapping the spokes in the rear wheel due to the lack of a proper cush drive in it. So if the tension in those spokes wasn't kept absolutely right, the spokes would actually snap. And I did actually find a couple of broken spokes, not on my bikes, but actually I pointed them out to other people using the same machines. Now, I still have one of those bikes. It's now my 40-year-old classic, and I actually do check the spokes on a fairly regular basis by actually going around the wheel with a little spanner and just giving each spoke as I go a tap. And if it responds with a nice musical note, then I know it's okay. But if I get a dull thunk, it means it's loose. It means it's time to get the spoke spanner out and just tweak it up a bit. Maybe the bike won't start. Okay, that can be a little bit of a puzzle. There can be all sorts of weird problems, maybe fuel, maybe electrical, but you can certainly sort out two of the obvious issues very quickly: battery and fuses. Maybe it runs, but it sounds odd. My old 404, for example, used to advise me that it was time for me to adjust the supposedly automatic cam chain tensioner by hand because the whir of that engine became a clatter. But what if it just feels odd to ride? Now, this is where things can get rather complicated, or not, because there is a principle known as Occam's razor. Now, what Occam's razor actually says is that when you're faced with a problem, the explanation that is probably correct is the one that requires the fewest number of assumptions. So in other words, another way of putting it is if you're making a lot of assumptions to explain a problem, you're unlikely to be using the true explanation. Now, one of the things that pops up regularly. I used to get a lot of them on the old website when there were rather less websites around, and certainly no bike forums. I used to get a lot of questions in my sort of doctor's surgery section on the website on a nebulous handling problem. Somebody would come up with, "I've got a handling problem, can you help?" Well, it's a question that still kind of pops up from fairly regular basis. And it always amazes me sometimes how people responding to those questions actually start making some major assumptions about what the problem actually is. Now, for example, one of these messages, somebody, a newish but not totally green rider, who'd been riding for a couple of years, he had identified what he thought was a handling problem, and he had decided it was his rear shock, and he was asking for advice on which rear shock he should spend, as he had a budget of about £500, which one would sort the problem out. And there were two sets of responses. The first group assumed that he was actually right, and that they launched into personal assessments of different shocks, their failings and weaknesses, everything from sort of budget end of the market up to the very expensive end of the market. And I often wonder how many people have actually tried an entire range of shocks out on their bike back to back to find out which one works best. One of the things I always say is, yes, the part that you have just changed and replaced out an old one, the new one will always feel good, because you've just taken something old off the bike, and the new one will almost certainly be in slightly better condition. It definitely applies to tyres. When people insist that they're new tyres, they're new spanking brand new top of the range model, which are better than last year's model, they know that because the manufacturer told them. They've forgotten, of course, that they've just replaced a worn out set, and the handling on the worn out set won't be as good as the new ones. So opinions varied from, fit a budget shock, it will be okay because if you don't do much in the way of demanding riding, to don't fit a budget shock, you need a top of the range shock to get perfect handling, as if the rider was actually going to be competing in British superbikes. Some went even further and suggested that they needed to get the forks sorted out to get the full benefit from a rear shock, otherwise they would be wasting their money. But I think you can see the first assumption that the shock was actually at fault. So the second set of responses were actually asking the first question which needed to be asked: why do you think it's the rear shock? Well, the answer, it turned out, predictably I suppose, was that the bike wasn't handling as well as he thought it did. Fair enough. But having told his mates this and asked them their opinion, it turned out that it was them that were saying, well, the rear shock on that bike's toast after 20,000 miles, it's rubbish, and you should throw it away and get a new one. So the next batch of questions actually asked him to look at the shock, and the first one was, is the shock actually leaking? So cue a pause while he went outside and took a look at the bike, and he came back in, that never having occurred to him to check that. Presumably neither his mates had mentioned that either, or probably not even those people recommending the new shock. So he went out and checked the shock to see if there was any oil seeping from it, and the answer was no. Now, no leak doesn't mean that the shock hasn't reached the end of its useful life. After 20k of courier work, for example, the shock on the rear of my old GS500, it was still keeping all its oil inside where it was supposed to be, but the biro spring that was fitted to keep the thing up had sagged till it lost a lot of its travel, and it was actually bottoming over fairly modest bumps, actually. So what I did with that one was I actually got it re-sprung, and with new spring on the shock, the damping was fine, and in fact the shock made it for another 40 odd thousand miles of dispatch work, nearly a year, at that mileage I was doing, before it actually blew the seal, and I went on to buy a replacement shock. So check the shock, make sure that the shock isn't leaking, and if it isn't, maybe it's the spring. But that's still not possibly the answer. The questions moved on to, what kind of symptoms are you getting? Now, what I was expecting him to say was that the back end of the bike was feeling very bouncy over bumps, and particularly when cornering, or maybe it was bottoming out. But the answer was actually rather vague. He said, I don't know, it just doesn't feel right tipping into corners. So probably wasn't the shock. So we moved on to getting him to check some other parts of the bike. One obvious one to go for is the steering head bearings. Now, when they wear, they create a kind of notch when the bars are in the straight ahead position, and it takes a little bit of effort to get the bars to move out of that notch. So eventually the bike it becomes reluctant to steer. They get worse and worse and worse, and eventually it's very obvious what the problem is. But in the early days, it can be pretty imperceptible unless you put the bike on the with the front wheel up in the air and swing the bars from side to side, and then you can usually feel it, but you may not feel that at all whilst you're actually riding the bike. So anyway, we asked him to check that, and it turned out not to be worn steering head bearings. So where could the problem be? Now, my thoughts at this point moved on to tyres, and in fact, this is probably where we should have started in the first place when you think about it. So we did check that they weren't worn, and he came back and said, no, the tyres are nearly new. So it did cross my mind that it could be a mismatched pair, or it could be a worn tyre at one end and a brand new tyre at the other. Because that can produce some fairly weird handling. In my experience, a very worn front tyre with a new rear produces some evil handling, and so does the other way round. A brand new front with or brand new rear rather with a worn out front tyre, that can produce some bizarre handling too. So you can ride round it, but it certainly won't feel right tipping into corners. But no, wrong again. The answer came back. He'd had them replaced as a pair. They were both fine. They're both nearly new. So we asked about his riding style. Was he particularly well built? Did he carry a passenger? Did he do a lot of two-up riding? Was fully loaded with luggage? Was he touring on the bike? Was he doing track days? What was he doing with the bike to get the symptoms that we were being told about? And it turned out, no, none of that, just ordinary riding around solo and occasional ride outs with his mates. Anyway, we moved on. We suggested he checked his bike over for other problems, because as well as the steering head bearings, wheel bearings and swing arm bearings can also result in some very odd handling characteristics indeed. Or better yet, by this point, we were starting to say, get somebody who knows what they're doing to take a look at the bike. And then all of a sudden, it went mysteriously quiet. There were no responses from him, no further questions. And about 2 weeks later, I thought, wonder what happened. So I hadn't forgotten, and I tacked an extra response onto the thread. And I said, how are you getting on with your bike? And back came the sheepish reply. The front tyre was down to 16 psi, and the rear was at 12. So yes, that would make the handling rather interesting, wouldn't it? Now, he'd assumed that the tyres that he had fitted were at the right pressure because they were nearly new. So we asked him, how long have they been on? Oh, I had them fitted last summer. I don't do many miles. So basically, we should have probably got him to check that very first thing of all. But I guess, like a lot of people, we assumed that he would have checked his tyre pressures, but it appears not. Just a few weeks later, another rider complained that his bike was suddenly difficult to manoeuvre in and out of the garage. Didn't used to be this difficult to push around. Now, lots of sensible answers again about checking for the brakes and see if they were dragging, but it turned out when he put the bike up on the stands, the wheels spun freely. So guess what? It was another rider with nearly flat tyres. So no wonder he was pushing it around, and it was hard work. I thought the tyre fitter put them on at the right pressure. Well, he probably did, but as we realised, that was also last year. And then days later, another rider who found his bike suddenly wouldn't go round bends also turned out to have less than half the recommended pressure in the front tyre. Now, that one turned out to be a slow puncture. And finally, there was the rider of the brand new bike that wasn't steering easily. And again, he thought it was a problem with the factory fit steering damper, which his mates had told him was rubbish and needed replacing with something expensive out of the Olin's catalogue. It turned out he'd taken a delivery of a nearly new bike, or a new bike rather, with nearly flat tyres. So moral of the story, if you've got a handling problem, start with the basics. The tyres are the first thing to touch the ground. check the tyres, check them for wear, check them for bumps, lumps, inconsistencies in the tread. Treads do get damaged, and check pressures. Now, you'll find a lot of people will tell you that you need a digital tyre pressure gauge, something like that. Personally, I wouldn't bother. Somebody told me, oh, but they're accurate to a tenth of a psi. Well, they might be, but you'll let more than a tenth of a psi out when you pull the thing off the valve cap. So I really wouldn't worry too much about that. And anyway, the one reasonably expensive digital one that I did buy, it lasted 3 months till the non-replaceable battery packed up. This one actually came from New Zealand. I bought that out in I didn't buy that. I was given that one. Yes, when I was out in New Zealand doing the Shiny Side Up tour, a couple of years old. It's accurate enough to check the pressures. It's accurate enough to tell the difference between close enough and get the pump out, which is all I really want it to do. And even easier, frankly, keep a basic pencil type tyre gauge under the seat. They're incredibly easy to use. They will always work. They won't go flat, and they are surprisingly accurate. They have been tested against digital gauges, and honestly, you won't find a great deal of difference. So just remember to use it occasionally. Right, okay, so Terry has just made a couple of comments there. He says, good close-up clean of the bike will often reveal issues. Absolutely, yep, absolutely. I would always recommend that a rider does clean the bike occasionally, because you will pick up things like the missing bolt I found had fallen out of the rack mounting system on the RS 250. So that was replaced with one with a lock nut on the other side of it just recently. And Terry also says low tyre pressure could be a function of it being a mare to get the air nozzle on the tyre valve. Indeed it can. You can get screw-on pressure gate, right angle pressure thingies put on the tyre. I don't recommend you leave them on there though, because they do put a bit of stress on the rubber of the tyre valve. All right, okay, so that's it. We've had quite a bit of a long show today, make up for a bit of a short one last time out. So 2 dates for the diary just to finish off. Live on Wednesday 6th of July at 8 p.m. in the evening. Tickets cost £5, is my live online talk, cornering and fixing cornering problems. And the idea is that this talk won't tell you how to ride corners properly. What it will tell you is the errors that riders make in corners and how to recognize those errors so that you can actually try to avoid them before you make them where possible, or you can recognize them when you are making them and then apply some simple get out of trouble strategies. So that's cornering and fixing cornering problems. That's Wednesday the 6th of July at 8 p.m. £5 for tickets. The link to the tickets is in the preamble to the show. And finally, don't forget that August live event will be the full presentation of Science of Being Seen. So that's the first Wednesday in August. And Tony says, what about the dashboard display on my BMW? Well, if you've got one, that solves that problem. It should hopefully be accurate, but it means if you've got a weirdly wobbly handling problem, it probably isn't your tyre pressures. But even if you have got one, I would always double check if you do have a handling issue. I would always double check that the sensors are actually reading correctly. I have heard of sensors sending out false signals. So, right, that is it for today. Thank you very much indeed for tuning in. I hope you've enjoyed the show. It has gone on a little bit longer than normal because I was last one was a little bit of a short one, so added a little bit of extra content today. Don't forget, if you've got any feedback, questions, do drop me a line. Kevin Paul has sent me a couple of suggestions which I will be looking at and trying to feed into shows in the very near future. But meanwhile, if you are heading out on your bike today to enjoy what is a cooler and dry morning down here in the southeast, do stay shiny side up.